welcome to another Backstage on Making Apps Beautiful. So this is part 2 after all 5 parts of the DevBytes series Making Apps Beautiful have been released. And I'm joined by...
Yeah, I'm Jan-Felix Schmakeit. I was here last time as well. I'm based here in Sydney on the Android Developer Relations team.
And I'm Ankur Kotwal, and I'm a software engineer on the Android Developer Relations team as well. So we had some good discussions last time, but we've had quite a lot of questions since. Yeah. So let's talk about the elephant in the room to begin with, which is the source code. So in Making Apps Beautiful, we showed different stages of the apps, the app that we were building, and people were asking if we were going to release the source code, and the answer is yes, we're going to do that. We're going to do that very shortly. I'm just cleaning it up and preparing it so that you can have a look.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think people are really excited about this, really want to dig through it again.
Yeah. We also had some follow-up questions from the last show.
Yeah, so we had a very popular question on the cards layout that a lot of people seem really excited about. And there was a follow-up question from the Tiny Matt, who was asking a bit more about the specifics of implementing a cards layout that's a bit dynamic, so you can have different size cards together. And I thought about this a bit more, and I think that there's lots of different ways you can do this. So one way we've done it is that we have actually used our own view group. So if you want to have something that's a bit more abstract, you can just add your own content to it. I think there's a bit more work involved. So you would actually have to look at overriding a view group, doing your own measurements and layouts and all of that kind of stuff. But if it's just something as simple as displaying different size content and it's just a list basically, just a resizable layout might just do the trick, and a 9 patch in the background. So there might be a bit more work involved, but simply using a 9 patch in different size containers might work for you.
Yeah, and just to follow up as well, the person was asking about a 48-dip rhythm. Now, for when you're talking about something that's similar to the cards layout, 48 dips, just have a look at it. It might not be quite right, because typically a lot of these cards, you tend to have some rich content, you have some buttons that you can press as well. And if you try to squash all of that information into a 48 dip layout, you might find that you don't have enough space. So, I wouldn't say that you need to follow the 48 dip rhythm for cards layout to the letter. See what works well and provide the better user experience.
And if you think about how these cards layouts have been used in the past, for example, in the Play Store, there's obviously a big touch tag. In this case, it's generally the application icon or the movies icon or something, right? So it's always something big you can hit. So it's something to keep in mind when you design your user interface.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks.
Thanks for that follow-up question. It was good.
Yeah, the Tiny Matt. Okay, so we had some questions around the layout XML files that we had in the tablets episode.
Yeah.
The questions were actually around using references rather than just putting in your SW600DP resource folders. So do we want to sort of...
Yeah, so one big reason for this is that you don't want to duplicate your layouts, right? So if you want to reuse your layouts, it's just much easier to just have use references rather than copy and pasting the files multiple times into your APK, and it would bloat up the APK as well. But there's another reason as well. I mean, before Android API level 13, it's Android 3.2 Honeycomb. You only had these buckets that allowed you to look at the screen size, the actual screen size of the device. So like small, normal, large, and extra large screens. So a tablet would be an extra large screen bucket, for example. And the problem is this really didn't give you fine-grained control, because sometimes some devices would get classified as extra large, but actually a phone, for example, right? But it's really tricky to take this apart and actually provide a tablet-only layout and a phone-only layout. Above API level 13, API level 13 and above, we actually introduced some resource modifiers that you can use to look at the available screen size. You can look at the smallest width that's available on the device, and it doesn't change for rotation. So in this case, when you want to define a layout for for Nexus 7, for example, like a 7-inch tablet, you would look at 600 dp, or a 10-inch tablet would be 720 dp. So that's really useful as well. So this is where these references come in really handy, where you can just reuse your layouts in different ways.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, with the qualifiers that we added, you'll notice that they're now numerical. So you're talking about measurements You're talking about physical sizes of devices, whereas before when you had these arbitrary buckets, it was getting hard to classify a device in large or extra large because one of the strengths of the Android ecosystem is the variety of screen sizes. So you can get small tablets and large phones that could be large, extra large, it could be medium, whereas when you talk about these qualifiers, when you say 600 dp, you're now putting a physical measurement around the dimensions of that device. So that's why it works a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also important to note that this is the available size. So this is the size that's actually available to your application. So we're not just talking about the actual screen size anymore. We're talking about what's actually available for your application.
Great.
Cool.
So, do we need resources for every combination?
Not necessarily. Good question. So the Android framework actually takes care of this for you. So it tries to take a good guess at what are the best resources for you to use if you don't specify them for every single combination. So for example, if you specify a phone layout and you specify a 7-inch layout using the 600 dp resource quantifier, and you don't specify a 10-inch layout, bigger tablet layout, it would automatically pick the one that goes for the 600 dp for the 7-inch tablet, right? So it's trying to make a good guess at what's useful for you, and you can use it to your advantage, right? So I think it's a good idea to look at what's specific to some of your layouts and how you can trim down on the layouts and resources and images that you use.
Yeah, I mean typically we tend to use the 10-inch qualifier, which is 720 dp. The 7-inch qualifier, which is 600 dp, and then just not putting a qualifier, which is your fallback. So you've got phones, 7-inch tablets, 10-inch tablets as well. So they tend to cater for really the bulk of the devices, unless you're going for something very specialized, which generally we don't recommend because maintainability becomes more difficult. But 3 buckets will get you very far.
That's right.
All right, so
we talked a tiny bit about designing for platform independence in our series. We had the Nexus S, we had a tablet layout, we had a phone layout. So let's talk a bit about this a bit more. So do you have any good tips? So when you want to design a layout, you want to design an app for platform independence, what are the key things you should pay attention to or that you should do in your code?
Yeah, so so just to clarify, by platform, what we actually meant is device independent. So we're not linked to a particular device size. But look, when you're specifying layouts, the obvious thing is use dips. Use density independent pixels. They're physical measurements. We have some great documentation about this, so please check it out at d.android.com if you're not sure. But we also have a special qualifier or unit of measurement called SP. SP is actually what you should be using for things like text views, because they're telling you that the text that you have in these things like text views, you're going to scale that up based on the user preferences. So for example, if the user has got their accessibility settings set so that the smallest font size is a minimum of 14 rather than 12, then SP will honor that, whereas dips won't. So for text, use SPs. For everything else, use dips.
Yeah. And what about pixels?
Pixels, never use pixels. Never hard code pixel values in your layout. Now, obviously, your assets will tend to have pixels. Your images will be using a pixel coordinate system. There's a very simple mapping to dips, but we already talked in making apps beautiful, those DevBytes, about how you can use those images well, so that they kind of stretch nicely. They may crop. So we use center crop in all of the examples that we used.
Yeah.
So definitely.
Yeah.
And you should always, to go with pixels, make sure you don't use absolute layouts. Absolute layouts were in a very early version of the platform and were deprecated a long time ago. Our compiler will warn you about it, so please heed those warnings. And the other thing is, make sure you provide sort of images or assets for the different densities. So that at runtime, the device isn't having to scale up a low-resolution image on an XHDPI device. Yeah,
exactly right. So that's actually what's happening when you put in an image asset and you provide it in a XHDPI or MDPI a resource folder, but you're not specifying anything for LDPI or any other resources. It would actually get scaled up or would scale down, which is extra work for the device itself. So maybe not such a good idea. So it's always a good idea to put these in and process them beforehand.
And taking that one step further, quite a lot of apps will dynamically download images, right, from the web. So try and provide those assets on your server or whatever content you're getting such that it comes down in the right resolution. Or when you fetch it, make sure you do the conversion so that you're not having to do it at runtime, but just the one download cost at the time you download it for the relevant resolution. All right, so we had some more questions as well.
Actually, before we go on, let's see if there's anyone in the on the Hangout. So if you have any questions, feel free to join our Hangouts on air. There's the link posted on our Plus page. So if you have any questions, feel free to just post it in the chat, and we'll put you up on the screen if you want to be live on air.
Yeah, so you can still ask questions and not come on the screen if you like.
No pressure.
Yeah, there's no pressure. People feel shy. While we wait for people to ask us questions, we do have others that people submitted. Antonio said, I'd like to know, what do you think about using different fonts? Basically, he was saying, what if I don't want to use Roboto and I want to use a custom font? And so, to be honest, the answer is you can use whatever font you like, but at the end of the day, make sure you've considered the different aspects of the type of font you use. So does it look great on a 3-inch phone screen, but does it blow up well onto a 10-inch tablet? Does it support different languages, accented characters, and so on? So by all means, we do encourage you to use your own fonts and ship them with your app if you'd like. Don't make assumptions about which fonts are going to be available. So other than Roboto and Droid Sans, don't make assumptions about what users are going to have. But Antonio said he was from Spain, so perhaps there's a particular font that works well for the accented characters that you get in Spanish.
Yeah, that's actually an important point as well. It's when you add in custom font, you have to make sure it supports other international characters as well, especially if you've translated your app or you want to reach users in other countries, in other languages. So when you add a custom font, make sure it works for all your languages that your app is available in.
Yeah. Okay, we had Leander Berg also asking a question, saying for tablet optimizations, Nick Butcher, he said Nick, but I'm pretty sure it's Nick Butcher, has some interesting tips for his design bytes. He had a grid view in tablets and a list view on phones. How would I implement this? Is it always a grid view just with different layouts, or would I switch between the two? Actually, the option's yours. You could just go with a single grid view that's one column on phones and multi-columns on a tablet. Or you could switch them around, and basically what you would do is using those same resource qualifiers, you could have a value that indicated whether you're in the grid view mode or the list view mode, and conditionally in your code, when you do a find view by ID, you would cast them to the right type. So actually there is no right way to do it. There's multiple ways to do it, which is always a good thing. You could, it makes sense to use grid views on tablets, because then you can have, especially if you're doing like a tiled UI, you want to be able to use that extra space that you get on tablets. Okay, so we had some episodes on performance tuning, and we talked in our episode a little bit about LRU cache, the least recently used cache. It's great, and I hope more and more people are using it, because as you saw in our episode, it makes a massive difference to the performance of your app and the experience as well. And it tries to do the right thing by holding onto your images as long as possible. So the hard work's done for you. It's just a matter of utilizing it.
Yep.
But there is some other libraries that you can use to fetch.
Yeah, so we didn't talk in our series, but there are obviously a lot of other libraries you can use to like fetch images, do some processing of the URL and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to do all of the work yourself every single time you want to do something. So one really good library that we've been using is called Volley. There was a talk at Google I/O this year that I would highly recommend for you guys to check out. That's a library that's open source and is part of the Android framework as well.
Yeah, so we use it extensively. It's actually written by a Googler, Ficus.
Yeah.
And it's great. So, it asynchronizes your web requests.
Yeah.
So you can basically have a very responsive user interface that brings images in the background, for example.
Yeah, so it's very easy to use, actually. You basically say, here's an image, here's the URL, here's the view where I want to put it. And it goes off, does it automatically, and updates the URL in the right thread, and all of this kind of stuff for you, which is really handy. But you can also use it for other things, not just images. So if, for example, built in, I think, is support for JSON as well. So if there's some JSON you want to fetch from a server, you can use the Volley library for that as well. And it gives you back a JSON object and JSON array, and it's really, really handy. And there are all sorts of other really cool features in there. For example, there's a caching for you, has really good cancellation policies. If you want to stop requests, you can group them together and all that kind of stuff. I would highly recommend checking that out. Having said that, there are a lot of other libraries out there as well that people are using these days as well. One of the ones was Picasso that somebody mentioned on in a YouTube comment. So have a look at your app and see which library does exactly what you need to do.
Yep, so that's Picasso, not Picasa, like the photo app and website.
Yep.
All right, and I guess the good news that since we recorded the episode is that Action Bar Compat is finally out.
Yes.
So when we recorded it, we were like coming soon, but it's great. It's released and it's part of the support library. So please grab it. Use it. Let us know what you think about it.
Yep.
We also have a DevByte on using Action Bar Compat, so it's a good way to get you started. It's a good primer. So, now we've had some questions around, should I use Action Bar Compat? Should I use Action Bar Sherlock? Action Bar Sherlock, widely popular. We talked about it in our DevByte as well. So if you're comfortable with Action Bar Sherlock, go ahead, keep using it. Both are great libraries, so use what works for you. What we're going to be doing is, as we update the action bar in the Android framework, let's say we do it in a future version of the Android framework, we're going to make sure that Action Bar Compat is also kept up to date. So that's one of the things that you'll get straight away from Action Bar Compat, but use what works well for you.
That's right. Yeah, so the navigation drawer is always an interesting topic, and we kind of shot it off a bit, I think, in one of the last episodes that we did.
Yeah.
And that's part of the support library as well, isn't it?
It is. You can grab the classes, you can just drop it in and start using it. The nice thing is we talked about all of the subtleties that come with the standardized Android action bar, and you get those. You don't need to sit there implementing the nice, beautiful fade in, fade out, or the bezel swipes. It's all taken care of for you.
Yep.
So using standard components is always a good thing. You don't have to write it and test the code yourself.
That's right.
Okay, the last thing I think we should talk about, we didn't really talk about it, is notifications.
Yeah, so there's a notification compact in support library as well. So in Android 4.1 Jelly Bean, we introduced new types of notifications. So you can have expanded notifications. So you can display a different type of notification depending on whether it's expanded or not expanded. It's really useful for email messages, for example. So you can see all of your emails in your notification list, so you can minimize and only see that you have some unread messages. And this is something that we've added to the notification compat in the support library as well. But the problem here is that expanded notifications are not backwards compatible. So if you use the notification compat builder that's in the support library, you can add all of these things to your notification, but it doesn't get displayed on lower versions of Android, unfortunately. But the good thing for you, it's transparent. So you don't have to worry about version checks and all of that kind of stuff. It simply isn't displayed. One really big hint I have, though, is that if you make use of these expanded notifications or notification actions, how you can have buttons at the bottom of a notification, so you can reply straight away or call someone back straight away, make sure you always supply a content intent. And the content intent is the one that's fired when a user taps the notification. And this is basically what gets fired on lower version of Android. So Gingerbread, for example, we don't have support for these notification actions, right? So it's always really, really important to specify the content intent that gets fired off when somebody taps your notification.
Awesome.
Good.
Well, it doesn't look like we have anyone asking any questions on the Hangout. I think we've covered the sort of questions that we had leading up to this. So on that note, I guess we'll say goodbye. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next
Bye-bye.
time. Thanks.